Jewish people to the land of Israel is anti-Semitism in its purest form. But why should anti-Semitism matter to the rest of the world? Why should the world care? It should, not merely because it's morally repugnant, which it most definitely is. The world should care about anti-Semitism because of fundamental self-preservation. The stark truth is that the world stands at the edge of a deep, dark precipice. At the bottom lurks another Holocaust that has already begun. This time, the genocide is not only against the Jews. The so-called Islamic State had made it abundantly clear that it can be committed against non-Jews. ISIS persecuting and killing members of every religious, ethnic, and nationalistic community they encounter. ISIS is slaughtering Syrians, Iraqis, Lebanese, Palestinians. ISIS is slaughtering Christians, Sunnis, Shiites, Alawites, Kurds, Druze, and Yazidis. ISIS floods the internet with stomach-churning images and videos of mass executions, severed heads, and crucifixions. We see children slaughtered in front of their parents and parents slaughtered in front of their children. This viciousness is a part of a calculated strategy explicitly intended to terrorize anyone and everyone who does not submit to their version of Islam. ISIS has officially declared its intent to rule the world. Their founding document, the declaration of their caliphate, bears the modest title, هَذَا وَعْدُ اللَّهِ. It means in Arabic, this is the promise of God. They declare that God promised to Muslim, quote, leadership of the world and mastership of the earth, end quote. Their declaration of a worldwide caliphate reveals their governing philosophy. Quote, by Allah, if you disbelieve in democracy, secularism, nationalism, as well as all the other garbage and ideas from the West, and rush to your religion and creed, then by Allah, you will own the earth, and the East and the West will submit to you. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, savagery is not merely their strategy. It is an article of their faith. They commit genocide in the name of Allah. Israel has been familiar with the concept and the reality of genocide in the name of Allah for a long time. The war that ISIS has declared on the world is the same war as the war that Hamas has been waging against Israel for decades. The only difference, again, is focus. ISIS seeks a worldwide caliphate. Hamas is focused on the destruction of Israel. However, their motivation, methods, and morals are the same. In terms of brutal methods and lack of morals, ISIS has recently shot, hacked, and killed its way to the top of the world's terrorist organizations. Meanwhile, Hamas has been committing mind-numbing mass atrocities for decades. They used to wrap their children in dynamite and nails and send them to blow up Israeli buses and restaurants. They rejoiced at the death of Israeli children and glorified the death of their own. Today, they use them as a human shield. I know something about children being used as human shields. In 1976, when I was 11 years old, Palestinians in South Lebanon used me and my family as human shields. They employed exactly the same technique that Hamas uses in Gaza today. They set up artillery or rocket launchers in front of my bomb shelter and fired a barrage towards Israel. They would pack up and run as quickly as possible, leaving my family to the devastation of return fire. Today, Hamas hides behind human shields on a much larger scale. Hamas routinely uses schools, mosques, hospitals, and other civilian locations for weapons storage, missile launch sites, and other military purposes. They fire rockets on mortars from these places with the explicit intention of drawing return fire from the Israelis, hoping that they will produce photogenic civilian corpses for display in the media. Hamas and ISIS share a common motivation. They want to impose Islam. This is the charter of Hamas, and it is in ISIS's declaration of the caliphate. The charter of Hamas declares that, quote, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, end quote. The most revealing words in the Hamas charter are a quotation from Islamic scripture. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews. The stones and trees will say, "O Muslim, O Abdullah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." This is from Hadith of Sahih Muslim, book 41. But Hamas has a problem. In Israel, Jews don't hide behind stones or trees. In Israel, Jews stand up and defend themselves. Israelis have learned from history that if someone repeatedly says they're going to kill you, they mean it. A lesson the world is only now learning. "70 years ago, the world stood by as the Jews of Europe went out the chimneys. Today, the Jews of Israel aren't going to go quietly into the slaughter as they sit on the front line of fighting for Western civilization, fighting for all of us. Those who seek to exterminate the Jews are not going to stop with the Jews. That should have been the lesson of the Holocaust. That must be the lesson of the rise of ISIS. Once the international mass murder of innocent civilians was legitimized against Israel, it was legitimized everywhere, constrained by nothing more than the strong-held beliefs of those who would become the mass murderers. Because the Palestinians were encouraged by most of the world to believe that the murder of innocent Israeli civilians is a legitimate tactic to advance their Palestinian cause, the Islamists believe that they may commit mass murder anywhere in the world to advance their holy cause. As a result, we suffer from a plague of terrorism, Islamic terrorism, from Moscow to Madrid, from Bali to Beslan, from Nairobi to New York, authored and perfected by the Palestinians. Israel and the United States are not separate targets of Islamic terrorism. The whole world is their target, and the world better learn this lesson and learn it fast. Evil dwells when courageous men become bystanders. Lies spread when the informed become silent. Society deteriorates when apathy replaces activism. Tyranny comes when leaders become mediocre and haters become organized. Today, we are summoned to lead in our communities and our nations. We are summoned to wake up the apathetic and inspire the despaired, to silence the liars and educate the concerned, to speak tolerance instead of resentment, forgiveness instead of revenge, love instead of hate, peace instead of war. We are here at the United Nations today because each one of us is a leader and an instrument of change with history as our final judge. How will we be judged? I, as a leader of ActForAmerica.org, the largest national security organization in America, with chapters in 11 countries around the world, am committed to do whatever possible we can to stand up with the Jewish people and defend them. The civilized world must band together in solidarity to ensure that people of all faiths can live in peace and harmony, and that Jews are never persecuted and victimized by barbaric, murderous ideologies ever again. That Jews can walk in any street in the world with their head held high and safe. That Israel, the Jewish state, the only democracy in the Middle East, continues to shine as a beacon of light in the darkest regions of the world. Thank you for having me here today. It's been an honor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
of all, 80% of families in Gaza now rely on humanitarian aid.
A what?
80% of families in Gaza rely on humanitarian aid.
I didn't hear. Or what? 80% of people in Gaza
rely on humanitarian aid.
Why?
Why? Because they have nothing.
They had an opportunity. Israel left. There were greenhouses.
But may I finish?
There were opportunities to develop an economy. The fact that they're all on goddamn welfare really shows something. They're in refugee camps. That's all self-induced. Be self-reliant. Build a state. Do something right. Work instead of going out and make rockets. I'm not feeling sorry for people who rely on the United Nations. Build a state. Do something right.
Okay, I'm just...
Go ahead.
I'm going to move on to my question.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to my question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm a Palestinian citizen of Israel. My grandparents were internally displaced from Jaffa to Nazareth and from Ain Harud to Bisan, where my grandparents, his land in Ain Harud was confiscated by absentee property law, despite being present by all means. And now there's a kibbutz on his land that produces, I think, the most olives in Israel. Now, I'm not the only one. 24% of Israeli citizens are not Jewish. And now, I cannot marry...
Please ask your question. We're running out of time.
Yeah, okay. What I'm trying to say is that Israel, by definition, and is not a democratic state. You have the right of return law that says that any Jew can return to Israel.
You know
but I cannot marry somebody from Ramallah without...
You know that the Palestinian Authority has a right to return law? Is the Palestinian Authority a racist state?
Yeah, but my land is in Jerusalem.
No. Well, put that aside. The Palestinian Authority has a law of return. China has a law of return. Germany has a law of return. If there's one country in the world that is entitled to have a law of return, it is certainly the one country in the world whose citizens were murdered, 6 million of them, because no state would accept them. Palestinians are today accepted in many parts of the world. Now, the claim about property is a reasonable claim. 800,000 Jews have similar claims in Yemen, in Iraq, in Egypt. Over 1 million Sudeten Germans have claims like that. Pakistanis, Bangladeshians and Indians have claims like that. Cypriots have claims like that. But in every other situation, the refugees have moved on. There is in life a statute of limitations. We're 50 years beyond 1940. We're 60 years beyond 1948. Get over it. Move on. Build yourself a state. Don't live in the past. Don't live in refugee camps. The Jews who survived the Holocaust got over it. They don't walk around with keys to their homes in Poland and in Lithuania and in Yemen. They live in the present and in the future. The time has come for the Palestinians to move on.
I'm not saying this, and I don't agree with what I'm going to say. But why don't I say that Jews move on from the Holocaust?
They do. They do. They built a state. They won a woman won a Nobel Prize. Holocaust survivors. They're inventing. They're doing productive things. The Palestinians tragically are living in the past. They're rooted in their refugee camps. It's not all their fault. It's not all their fault. Many of the other Arab states are using the Palestinians as pawns by keeping them in refugee camps instead of integrating them into the population. They're treating them as slaves. Palestinians have grievances, but the grievances are only partly against the Jewish people. And by the way, I didn't hear the Palestinian grievances between 1948 and 1967 when their land was taken away when they were occupied by the Jordanians and when their land was taken away when they were occupied by the Egyptians. They seem to be more concerned about being occupied and their land being taken away. And remember, there wouldn't have been a single refugee if the Palestinians had accepted the 1948 UN resolution. If they had accepted Israel as a state and built their own state, there wouldn't be a single refugee. The refugee problem is the fault of the fact that Arab states all invaded Israel. That's the truth, isn't it?
So, on this note, Amtrak is not going to wait. Unfortunately, we have to cut the evening now because of the train schedule. First of all, thank you very much, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
coming. Thank you, Professor Bishop.
Our home was not taken over by the Israelis. No Israeli tank or platoon or soldiers came over and said, get out of here, get out of here. We want to take this house.
The country was bisected by war. Even without Arab leaders encouraging Palestinians to leave, many might have left out of fear, and indeed out of a certain belief that the Arab armies will come out victorious from this war and they could come back to their land.
Many more people left because they were told that in a few days, or at worst a couple of weeks, they would return with the triumphant Arab armies to take their lands back and have more than they ever had before.
وهيك عشنا وقالوا لنا بعد 15 يوم ترجعوا وما رجعناش. دملنا المفاتيح بالتراب، جابونا على الكارنتينا، صاروا يدبروا لنا هاي، وبعدين اخذوا هذا المخيم وعملوا لنا خيم مثل معسكرات، صاروا يمنعوا اللي يطلع واللي يجي، ومثل السجن سجنونا.
The Arab governments were largely responsible for the ruin of the Palestinian Arabs. By exaggerating their hopes, they made them intransigent. Our leaders are the responsible ones, spreading rumors of massacres and atrocities committed by Jews. They distilled terror in our hearts until we ran, thus abandoning our homes to our enemies.
نخش على الواحد كده يصيب يزغط البنت ولا المرأة ولا اللي هو يبقى واقف جوزها ولا اخوه يوقفون ويدق في البنات وهالنسوان وبعدين يرشوا تعدير يصيب.
قلت له ايه رأيك كيف نغطي هالموضوع؟
I asked Dr. Khalidi how we should cover the story. He said, we must make the most of this. So he wrote a press release stating that at Deir Yassin, children were murdered, pregnant women were raped, all sorts of atrocities.
We said there was no rape. He said we have to say this so the Arab armies will come to liberate Palestine from the Jews.
This was our biggest mistake. We did not realize how our people would react. As soon as they heard that women had been raped at Deir Yassin, Palestinians fled in terror. They ran away from all our villages.
Arab radio stations passed on the false reports, ignoring the protests of the witnesses.
The Arab states encouraged the Palestinian Arabs to leave their homes temporarily to facilitate the passage of the Arab invading armies.
عندما كنت هاجرت نحو لقبيبة ابن شاهين في الشرق، ثم بعد ما سقطت بلدنا وجاء الجيش المصري فعدنا إليها فوجدت أن كل بيوتها محروقة، لأنكم تعلمون أنه بيت الفلاح هو عبارة عن بيت في شجر أغصان شجر وفي عليه قصب بذرة، إذا تعرفوا نبات الذرة البيضاء التي تؤكل هذه، وأيضا كمان مليس الطينة.
by inciting 1 million Palestinian Arabs to leave their lands for neighboring countries. We have brought about their destruction.
President Trump has torn up international agreements on refugees. He's threatened to dump international agreements on climate change. He's praised the use of torture. He's incited hatred against Muslims. He's directly attacked women's rights. Just what more does President Trump have to do before the Prime Minister will listen to the 1.8 million people who've already called for his state visit invitation to be withdrawn?
The Right Honourable Gentleman's foreign policy is to object to and insult the democratically elected head of state of our most important ally. Let's just see what he would have achieved in the last week. Would he have been able to protect British citizens from the impact of the executive order? No. Would he have been able to lay the foundations of a trade deal? No. Would he have got a 100% commitment to NATO? No. That's what Labour has to offer this country. Less protection for British citizens, less prosperous, less safe. He can lead a protest. I'm leading a country.
My Lords, Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination and is right at the heart of the Balfour Declaration. However, sadly, the term Zionist and Zionism has in some quarters become a proxy for anti-Semitism. I'm not one of those who immediately brand any critic of Israel as an anti-Semite, far from it. However, some critics of Israel leave themselves open to such accusations when they single out Israel for criticism but refuse to contextualize. Suicide bombings, knifings and missiles are daily occurrences for the citizens of Israel who live in a constant state of siege. Surely such acts against innocent civilians require some criticism from those who are continually on Israel's case. But no, there are those critics of Israel who, by their silence on the terror inflicted by Hezbollah and their ilk, condone it. When Israel acts in self-defense, the narrative is distorted to fit their narrative of Zionist aggression. On the 16th of June, recently, 2 Palestinians unprovoked attacked Israeli police officers in Jerusalem with guns and knives, while the third stabbed to death Border Police Staff Sergeant Hadass Malka, aged 23. BBC headline on their news website was, 3 Palestinians killed after deadly stabbing in Jerusalem. BBC eventually changed their headline to Israeli policewoman stabbed to death in Jerusalem. They accepted their mistake and subsequently changed it. Of course, I'm not accusing BBC journalism of anti-Semitism, but this example demonstrates the drip-drip effect of unqualified, uncontextualized singling out of Israel for criticism. If the BBC can get this wrong, it's little wonder that Israel finds it so hard to put aside the idea that some critics are motivated by something more sinister than political commentary. Meanwhile, 100 years on, as we are hearing, there is much to celebrate in Balfour's visionary declaration. And if I may end on a plug, I recommend everybody to read Lord Turnberg's excellent book.
And as a reporter, I can tell you that the continent that Bernard-Henri Lévy and I love, Europe, led to eliminationist politics in Austria, in Germany, and the greatest crime that mankind has ever witnessed. But anti-Semitism has changed And now it finds its expression in opposition to the Jewish people's collective. But worse than that, worse than libeling the State of Israel, the BDS campaign, by calling for the deliberate boycott of goods manufactured by Jewish people, by calling for the shunning of the Jewish state and the rejection of Jewish commerce and Jewish thought, actually commits a crime worse than apartheid. It reintroduces into our world and into our society a prejudice against the Jews collectively that should have vanished from the earth generations ago. A unique privilege to be here, on behalf of the British government and the British people, to thank you, the American people, for your solidarity on the side of liberty, for your faith in democracy, for standing with Israel against its enemies, the Islamists, the fundamentalists and the anti-Semites, who hold all our values in contempt. And for that reason, I want to thank you for standing up for what is right and defending truth in your pages and in your person at this moment of crisis. Thank you.
To terrorists like the Taliban or other terrorist groups in the Middle East.
What do you make of reports that President Obama has asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to hold off on striking Iran until after the 2012 presidential election?
Well, of course, I don't know what President Obama's agenda really is, but I know one thing. I know that we should all support the state of Israel. Israel, Kathleen, is fighting our fight. Israel is exactly on the border of jihad and reason. Israel is a beacon of light, a canary in the coal mine, so to say, in an area of darkness and tyranny. And I believe that parents in America and in Europe can sleep easily at night because Israeli parents lay awake at night worrying about their children defending our borders. The border of jihad is our border. We share the same cultural values as Israel does. And let me tell you, if Jerusalem falls, Athens will fall, Amsterdam will fall, and America will fall as well. They are fighting our fight. So I believe we should do anything possible to support the state of Israel, certainly against this barbaric regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
I'm that always writing Jew, that footnote citing Jew, that academic Jew, scholar Jew, that thinking Jew, and let me tell you something Jew. Worker Jew, white collar Jew, that tend the flock and herder Jew, that calloused foot and hand Jew, that roam the barren sands Jew, that tills and works the land Jew, that old Jew, new Jew, that makes the desert grow Jew, that always trying to make things just a little better Jew. At the same time, don't mind if I'm a self-centered Jew, and that persistent sweated out Jew, that I made it big because I earned it Jew, that give me what I want because I know that I deserve it Jew, that arrogant Jew, that humble Jew, that whatever Jew I'm in the mood to be Jew, just like you, that oh yes, I'm just getting started Jew, I'm that Israeli Jew, that Caribbean Jew, that English, Indian, Sephardic Jew, that Ashkenazi, blonde and blue-eyed, no I'm not a fixer Jew, New York Jew, LA Jew, Australia and Ukraine Jew, that Russian, South African, Ethiopian and French, je suis juif Jew, that proud of being Jewish Jew, that Jesus Jew, Judas Jew, that don't know why I'm still being persecuted Jew, scapegoat Jew, that whenever we're murdered, you probably think we had it coming Jew, but still, not afraid to wear my Star of David, Am Yisrael Chai Jew. And that feeling the world has gone mad, and damn it, I want to get off Jew, that way too much horror in the news everywhere I turn Jew, that fed up with ISIS beheading Christians, knife-wielding, suicide-bombing lunatics Jew, that disgusted by Boko Haram, Boston Marathon, Lynn Cafe, Pakistani schoolchildren killers, and I've had enough of radical Islam to last me a lifetime Jew, that they're killing so many of their own, but somehow we're blamed for that too, Jew, that wake up world Jew. And that you don't want to hear this, but I don't give a damn what you think Jew, that you're just going to have to deal with it Jew, that bullied in high school Jew because I was rocking a yarmulke Jew, that standing up to you Jew, that took to the hand Jew. And that Iron Dome cheering fan club, where were you when the missiles were raining down on Tel Aviv Jew, that just shalom motherfuckered you off my Facebook page Jew, That sick of your double standards, Jew, that UN today equals useless nations to me, Jew, that will fight it out if you have a problem with me, Jew. And yet, I'm that desperately wanting to live side by side in peace with you, Jew. That get to know me, and you'll see we're not so bad like they make us out to be, Jew. Bingo. I'm that who knew, Jew. I'm that needing to explain, Jew. That let's figure it out together, Jew. That questioning, Jew. The never ever just one answer, Jew. That contemplative Jew. That wild-haired genius Jew. That psychoanalytical and let me tell you something about you and your mother Jew. That never claimed to be perfect Jew. I'm that shelf-sagging with Nobel Prizes Jew. That brilliant scientist Jew. That astronaut Jew. That inventor of something that's part of your everyday life, but you don't even know it Jew. But I'm also that let's laugh it up Jew. That I'm on a boat and it's good to be the king Jew. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm the new rules in your face, butt-kicking, sassy, sexy, smart Wonder Woman Jew. That Harvard actress, director, and Princess Leia's mother all rolled into one Jew. That fiddler on the roof, always performing, but damn, I'm gone too soon Jew. And that lox and bagel noshing Jew. That falafel and hummus eating Jew. That couscous, schnitzel, latkes, and matzo ball soup Jew. And that only liberal democracy in the Middle East Jew. And that became a refugee when my ancestors were kicked out of Arab lands Jew. And that political Jew. That activist Jew. That gay Jew and female rabbi Jew. That eat a Big Mac, but I won't touch bacon Jew. That looking for the truth forever wandering Jew. That just want to get married under a chuppah and break a glass under my heel Jew. And that Merry Christmas, Ramadan Kareem, have a good whatever you're celebrating Jew. And that Hindu high-fiving, Sikh fist-bumping, Christian-loving, Muslim friend-having, Buddhist and Baha'i, I'd love to get to know you better Jew. And that religious Jew. That secular-loving my heritage Jew. That brother-in-arms Jew. Hero Jew. Soldier turned olive branch holding Jew. That put 3 bullets in my back. But you won't kill my dream Jew. That yearning for peace. And I've never been to Israel, but I'll get there someday, because it's my homeland Jew. That almost 6,000 years, and I'm still standing Jew. That Hatikva singing with a tear in my eye Jew. And that won't apologize for surviving Jew. That fighting for my rights Jew. That number 1 and number 6 million and every number in between Jew. That learned from what happened to us in the Holocaust Jew. That never, ever again Jew. And that wish there were more of us Jew. That creative Jew, business funk and folk Jew. That dancer Jew, painter Jew. That Taylor Baker wedding singer Jew. That neurotic Jew, part Jew, let love rule, and wannabe honorary Jew. And that lucky father Jew. That husband to a wonderful woman Jew. That son to loving parents who worked hard so I would be happy Jew. That grandson to those who suffered so we would just make it Jew. That thanks to them, I've got my whole life ahead of me Jew. And that everything's got a reason for being, and I'll keep looking for the answer Jew. That writing this to all my Jewish brothers and sisters Jew. And to those who aren't Jewish, but get this and show me love. I'm that writing this to you with utmost respect Jew. I'm that believer that we're going to be okay because there's no other choice Jew. That hang in there and keep your head up Jew. That human dignity will prevail and the world is made up of decent people Jew. And that believer that the decent people will win in the end Jew. Not a wishful thinking Jew, just true Jew.
چطور باتون برخورد شد از دیشب تا حالا؟ Iranian, how was Iranian behavior last night together with you?
It was good.
خوب بود، خیلی خوب برخورد ایرانی خوب بود.
It was a mistake. That was our fault, and we apologize for our mistake.
میگی که این یک اشتباه بود. من اشتباه کردم و عذرخواهی میکنم. معذرت میخوام بابت اشتباهم.
I'm only one call away. I'll be there to save the day. Superman got nothing on me. I'm only one call
One unit has become legendary, the Israeli medical unit.
We did everything that we can to be as fast as possible on ground.
Israel is only the world's 152nd biggest country, but it's always one of the first to send disaster relief all over the globe.
No matter where you go, no, you're not alone. I'm only one call away.
The earthquake in Haiti.
I'll be there to save the day.
The tsunami in Japan.
Superman got nothing on me.
The typhoon in the Philippines.
I'm only one call away.
Save a Child's Heart brings children with life-threatening heart defects to Israel for cardiac care.
Save a Child's Heart brings children from all over the world.
From Ethiopia and Iraq.
From Syria.
Tanzania.
From Sudan.
Gaza and Palestinian territories, even when these countries are actually at war with Israel.
Save a Child's Heart volunteers and doctors transport and treat these kids in Israel free of charge.
I just wanna see you smile. No matter where you go, you know you're not alone. I'm only one call away.
Innovation Africa brings Israeli technology to rural African villages. Volunteers have built schools,
Superman got nothing on me.
Medical clinics.
And change the lives of over 750,000 people by providing tools for solar power and clean water.
When you're weak, I'll be strong. I'm gonna keep holding on.
Israel goes beyond its borders to save a life.
Change the world.
Make a difference.
Israel is more than just a country.
Israel.
It's people helping other people.
When you feel like hope is gone, just run into my arms. I'm only one call away.
The Israelis came from the other side of the world.
I'll be there to save the day.
No one except the Israeli hospital has taken any of our patients.
Superman got nothing on me. I'm only one. I'm only one call away. I'll be there to save the day. Superman got nothing on me. I'm only one call away. I'm only one call away.
You know, we've been on the ground here in Israel for the past several days, and I've seen a lot. And frankly, this has been one big myth-busting trip. I came here with an open mind, and I thought I'm open to see anything, to hear from everyone. We've heard a lot of different opinions, do not get me wrong. We've talked to Palestinians, we've talked to pollsters, we've talked to Israeli members of the Knesset, we've talked to journalists, we've talked to people from the right, left, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israel, two-state solution, one-state solution. Hell, there is no solution. Let me tell you some of the things that we found out while we were here. The security wall, it's not a wall. It's a giant fence. Only about 5% of it is a wall. We found that Palestinians can actually freely come into Israel so long as they're not carrying any pipe bombs or explosive vests. They have to go through the sort of security that's akin to essentially going through an airport. You know who can't go the other way? Yeah, it's actually the Jews. It's actually Israelis. They can't go into Zone A. They can't go into the Palestinian, one part of the West Bank. That's according to essentially self-prohibition, but also because they know that if they go in there, there's a very good chance they will die. I'm a Christian. I really would have liked to see Bethlehem while I was here, you know, where my Lord and Savior was born. Can't. There's a giant minaret there right now. And actually there are posters all over the place of suicide bombers who are essentially exalted by the populace around now Muslim-controlled Palestinian Bethlehem. I should mention, by the way, that also behind me is an Israeli military hospital where they treat just Israelis. No, they actually treat a lot of Syrians there. Syrian women who from ages 8 to 80 have been brutally raped by ISIS. I came here believing in the two-state solution. I really did. I am at a point now where I frankly do not. I believe in a one-state solution. I believe that the only way that this little sliver, a sliver of land that could fit into one of the smallest states, New Jersey, the only way that this little piece of sand, these rocks, will remain free is if Israelis are in control of it. Because I'm worried that if you allow any portion of the West Bank or otherwise to become under Palestinian PLO, essentially terrorist or let alone Hamas control, it's going to look like that. Those are my reflections so far on the ground. Stay with us. We got more of the show after this very short break.
The largest immigrant-absorbing nation on Earth. It has absorbed 350% of its population in 60 years. Israel is the only country in history to have revived an unspoken language. Since the founding of the state, Israel has more Nobel Prizes per capita than any other country. It has more laureates in real numbers than China, Mexico, and Spain. Israel has the 8th longest life expectancy, 80.7 years, longer than the UK, US, and Germany. Israeli films were nominated 3 years in a row for the Academy Awards Best Foreign Film. Israel is the only country that entered the 21st century with a net gain in its number of trees, even more remarkable, in an area that's mainly desert. Over 90% of Israeli homes use solar energy for hot water, the highest percentage in the world. Israel's scientific research institutions are ranked 3rd in the world. Israel is ranked 2nd in space sciences. Israel produces more scientific papers per capita than any other nation by a large margin. Israel has the 3rd highest rate of entrepreneurship among women in the world. Israel has attracted the most venture capital investment per capita in the world, 30 times more than Europe. Israel leads the world in patents for medical equipment. Israel has more NASDAQ-listed companies than any country besides the U.S., more than all of Europe, India, China, and Japan combined. In proportion to its population, Israel has the largest number of startup companies in the world. In absolute numbers, Israel has more startups than any country other than the U.S. Israel is the only country whose indigenous population returned to its native land after 2,000 years of forced exile. There are 26 official Muslim states in the world and 18 official Christian states, but there is only one Jewish state. One of the smallest countries on Earth, with 1/1000th of the world's population, only 60 years old, under constant threat, and yet, relative to its population, Israel is the largest immigrant-absorbing nation on Earth. It has absorbed 350% of its population in 60 years. Israel is the only country in history to have revived an unspoken language. Since the founding of the state, Israel has more Nobel Prizes per capita than any other country except Switzerland. It has more laureates in real numbers than China, Mexico, and Spain. Israel has the 8th longest life expectancy, 80.7 years, longer than the UK, US, and Germany. Israeli films were nominated 3 years in a row for the Academy Awards Best Foreign Film. Israel is the only country that entered the 21st century with a net gain in its number of trees, even more remarkable, in an area that's mainly desert. Over 90% of Israeli homes use solar energy for hot water, the highest percentage in the world. Israel's scientific research institutions are ranked 3rd in the world. Israel is ranked 2nd in space sciences. Israel produces more scientific papers per capita than any other nation by a large margin. Israel has the 3rd highest rate of entrepreneurship among women in the world. Israel has attracted the most venture capital investment per capita in the world, 30 times more than Europe. Israel leads the world in patents for medical equipment. Israel has more NASDAQ-listed companies than any country besides the U.S., more than all of Europe, India, China, and Japan combined. In proportion to its population, Israel has the largest number of startup companies in the world. In absolute numbers, Israel has more startups than any country other than the U.S. Israel is the only country whose indigenous population returned to its native land after 2,000 years of forced exile. There are 26 official Muslim states in the world and 18 official Christian states, but there is only one Jewish state.
Let me say this, and this, I don't care about being popular or whatever. The first thing you got to do is you got to study and understand who you're up against. And you must realize that this is not a religion that you're fighting against. You're fighting against a theopolitical belief system and construct. You're fighting against something that's been doing this thing since 622 AD, 7th century, 1,388 years. You want to dig up Charles Martel and ask him why he was fighting the Muslim army at the Battle of Tours